In this video tutorial, we're going to cover how to block all labels and block all labels unless it's the last code button down. So in order for this tutorial to make sense, you should have already watched the default label behaviors tutorial. You can see on my screen that I already have a code window open, and I have this code button selected, not a label, but a code button selected, which has a lead time of 4, no lag time. And since you already have a sense of how labels behave by default, what I want to demonstrate is this checkbox that says block all labels. So if I check that box for taxi, the way that behaves now is that if I go to code mode, and again this functionality is specific to code mode and capture mode, that if I mark in with this code button and I click on any number of labels, because I've checked that box, block all labels, and I mark out of taxi now. Now let's hover over the instance. You can see that that code button, or now instance, did not get any labels applied to it. That's what, let me go back to edit mode. That's what block all labels does, is it blocks all labels from being applied to the given instance created by the code button. Now let's talk about unless last down. So it means this code button now is going to block all labels unless it's the last button down, pushed down. In other words, the last button activated. So again, this is talking about code buttons and the way labels are applied to them, as opposed to actually talking about the label itself, right? I'm talking about a code button. So if I go back to code mode here, I'm going to fast forward away a little bit from this first instance. And now let's mark in with 2 code buttons. So I'll mark in with taxi first. I'll play the video a little bit, and now let's make a point of noticing that I'll mark in with bus later on, or second. And because bus now, and remember, let's think of the code buttons like physical buttons. Let me pause the video for a second. So that, the buttons have states. I can push them down to mark in, or let them up to mark out. So if these were physical buttons, I've pushed both of them down, and the bus button is the last button I push down in terms of these code buttons. So remember, on the taxi button specifically, I've checked the box that says unless last down. So in this case, if it's not the last down button, if I click on any labels, theoretically the taxi button should not be able to accept those labels. So let's end both of the codes, which creates the instances. Now let's hover over, and you can see that taxi has no labels while bus does. So that's how unless last down affects the code button's ability to accept labels. If it's the only code button that's pushed down, it will be considered the last one down and accept labels. This functionality is most commonly used in situations where there is a particular sequence of events that equate to code buttons that happen. So maybe you click on a few different code buttons in a particular sequence, and it's always the terminating or last event that is of particular interest, so that typically you might add a bunch of labels to further describe the last event that was coded. So if you have a situation like that, this might be some helpful functionality. Thanks for watching.